let's go. What are we looking at here? We, to summarize this, what do you call it? Vertigo-inducing diagram here. Don't stare too long at it. You'll begin to see animals and stuff in it. This is Genesis is laid out in sort of a concentric format where you move from the more genealogically, you move down a line, or you move through forks in the road of genealogies, and to finally arrive at Jacob, who will be renamed Israel, who will end up relocating, immigrating his entire clan, the 12 tribes of, what will become the 12 tribes of Jacob, to Egypt, deliberately to embrace a status of slavery, of slave ship. It was not known at the time because Joseph was very powerful, who would be the catalyst for that. Joseph, an administrator in Egypt, but technically he was a slave. And it's another one of the great ironies. There's so many ironies in the biblical story. I've talked about them before. Well, the greatest irony, what I call the great reversal, which is that God defeated death by dying on a cross and rising from the dead. Paul went to Jerusalem to destroy the preaching of destroy the gospel, went to Damascus to destroy the gospel, but found himself preaching it when he got there. You know, these kinds of things. Moses, the man who was raised by Pharaoh, ended up being the man who not only led Israel out of Egypt, but destroyed the Pharaoh's army. Pharaoh led that man. Pharaoh raised that man in his own household. You know, these are a constant, it's a signature of God that he operates like that. And here's another one that the people of God at the very start will voluntarily, enthusiastically take the status of slave ship, from which they will have to be rescued from God as part of the divine plan 430 years later. And that in itself will become part of the great story, one of the great events in the history of redemption, because it's such a fixture in the Psalms of that, God leading his people out of Egypt with an outstretched, powerful arm, and so on and so forth. So none of these things happen by accident. Everything is by design and factored in. And so that's what we're seeing here. We are now at Abraham. We will arrive at Jacob in, I don't know, what is that, 28, 30? I don't remember. He will be renamed in 35 or something like that. We will see Joseph come into the narrative at 37. The last 13 chapters basically will be about Joseph, and then Jacob's migration to Egypt, something like that. But all this is propelled by genealogies, which we don't place a lot of stock in, but they certainly did. And you can see it diagrammatically. You can see it, visually here. I was trying to say diagrammatically. Come on, Gary. That's just trying to be impressive. It's just showing up diagrammatically. You can see it visually here, the use of genealogy to bring you through the work of God in the Bible. So let's talk about Israel for a second. This is the promise from chapter 12. Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house. I will make of you a great nation, and then in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. And this will dictate then the story of the Bible after this. The history of, this is the formal launch, if you will, of the history of redemption. The history of the redemption of the people of God. And everything in the Bible after this point, in some sense, points back to these three verses as its origin story, if you will. That's what I think. I think that's a strong statement, but somebody have to talk me out of it. Although you can. But let's talk about Israel for a second. This diagram was made for another reason. Let me make this big screen. You won't be able to see it on the Zoom feed bigger, but you don't need to. This will start my war with trying to get out of full screen here. So this is a concise history of Israel, in a sense, from Abraham through the exile. Covers, what, 1,500 years or something like that? So there's Jacob, there's Abraham at the beginning. The patriarchs, and that defines a period of patriarchal Israel. No, the patriarchal clan, there is no Israel yet, which will become Jacob, which will become Israel when Jacob is renamed. They will become a slave people in Egypt, which will last 430 years. Paul famously says, so does Moses in Exodus, at the time of the Exodus, I believe. Then that will lead to,
God also promised, he actually predicted it in chapter 15 of Genesis.
Yeah. It's at least a threefold thing, twice in the Old Testament, once in the New. That's a good point. And then that slave people will give way, once they get to Canaan, to what we could call a tribal federation. There's no nation there. Yeah, there's simply the 12 tribes, really the 11 if you throw out the Levites with the land divisions. You have there are a bunch of tribes with tribal elders that cooperate, but there's no, like a federation, but there's no nation yet. That will not happen until David. There's Saul beforehand, but we're going to leave him aside and say, really, from the vantage point of the history of Israel, the establishment of Israel as a nation with secure borders would be David and the kingdom established by David. And that won't last long. That will be divided, interior squabbling because of tribalism, which never left Israel. And so they will divide along tribal lines and become two kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel, which are 10 tribes, and the two southern tribes of Benjamin and Judah, with that famous statement by the northern tribes, everyone, what have we to do with you, David? Everyone to his own tent, or something like it. What he means is, you two, you tribe, you, Judah, who do you think you are? So we have two kingdoms now, northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judah. For the next 300 or so years, it's a disaster of idolatry. God judges them twice, once for the northern kingdom in 722, where they are dispersed among the nations by the Assyrians, and then the southern kingdom is dispersed under Nebuchadnezzar from the Babylonian Empire, which displaced the Assyrian Empire in 612 BC. So that's that period right there. This is right here. This before right here would be the beginning of the Babylonian Empire. And then that begins the period of the exile, which then will give way to the period of the post-exilic period under the Persians, who will allow them to return to Israel, or return to Canaan, let's call it, and rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. That's physical Israel. And physical Israel, it matters to say physical Israel because the story does not stop there. In fact, it continues down to this day, but we'll get to that in just a second. Let's see, from current slide again. So this is a totally unrelated slide. I used this in a sermon or two at another church. Probably use the other one too. But the history of Israel continues. We pick it up again with the exile of Judah under the Babylonians, just like we saw in the other one at the beginning here. And then a great event happens to the people of God when, under the providence of God, physical Israel no longer defined the boundaries for the people of God. But if Moses was the boundary, if one was established among the people of God by physical descent or by submission to Moses through circumcision and law keeping, that avenue was overthrown. Was the strong word I'm thinking off the top of my head here. When God established Jesus Christ as the King of the nations, which then allowed the nations to come into the people of God, into Israel. He radically redefined the very idea of Israel through Christ, not through Moses, but through Christ. And through faith, the nations could come in and participate equally within the people of God, alongside of Jews. There is one united people of God. As Paul says, there is neither Jew nor Greek, ... You are all one in Christ Jesus. And this is what he's talking about. That barrier of Moses has been broken down. Then in 70 AD, way over there, you'll see where it says Jewish revolt. That started in 66. It ended in 70 when the legions came in under Titus, the Roman general who would eventually become Caesar, and completely destroyed the temple, Jerusalem, laid waste to it. And that was it for anything. There was not even a Judea anymore. They even renamed it Syria Palestina, which is where the name Palestinian comes from. The Romans did that to obliterate, I think, the very idea of Judea, Jew. And so into exile, some kind of exile they went. They were allowed to stay on the land. In 132 BC, there was another uprising, the Bar Kokhba rebellion, that's when the Romans had enough. That was Hadrian, I believe. I get Hadrian and Trajan mixed up. The Caesars, the emperors. They're not Caesars, they're emperors. And that was it. And they were forbidden from being on the land. Physical Israel ceased to exist, even in principle, until 1948. It turns out the battle was not over when physical Israel reestablished the state of Israel in 1948 for the first time since 587 BC. That was, well, I guess you could, let's go with 587 BC. And so you have now a nation of Israel, which is now entirely secular as far as a nation goes. And now we await. It's not over yet. It's not over yet. And now we await God's move because there's been a fork. The people of God, defined by physical Israel, now have changed to the people of God defined by faith in Jesus Christ. And someday that story of Israel, physical Israel, will be picked up again. So there's not two peoples of God, one Israel, one Gentile. There is a people of God. And that story will be completed someday, which we won't get into right now. But that story was launched in Abraham, which is what we're talking about right now. So there's a concise history of physical Israel, which goes on today. And boy, are they fighting about it right now. You live in interesting times. As the question, what is Israel's right? How do we define Israel's right to exist continues to be explored, shall we say, and disagreed upon by various peoples. Any questions or comments about that? I find that interesting stuff as we see the world unfold and interplay in some sense with the biblical narrative. And just when you think God has been relegated to the backstory, oh, he comes back with a vengeance. He always reserves the right. And he always does. So that's,
I'm interested to see how this Gaza Strip stuff plays out.
So is everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we gotta move back from that dangerously provocative and interesting topic to get back to the Bible here. Or we'll never get back. Glenn, you got a problem with anything I just said? Not sure much of it has anything to do with Genesis, but sometimes it helps to keep the big picture and the relationship across the span of the centuries in place and before your eyes and in your mind. Okay, we are in at the end of chapter 13. We are with Lot and Abram, who has not been renamed yet. Lot is Abram's nephew. who came down from Haran with him. Haran is a city up north of Israel right here. So they came from Chaldea, his family, under Terah, the patriarch, takes his 3 sons to Haran with the intent of continuing on to Canaan. Before he can get there, he dies. And now Abraham will pick up the baton and take it into Canaan. What transpired between Terah and God, we have no idea. But, and we never will. Doesn't matter. What matters is Abraham was going to be the patriarch through whom God would establish the covenant promise. And we have this problem of now the presence of Lot, who is in some sense a threat to the covenant because he's an heir, he's a descendant. And so Abraham earlier in this chapter said, look, you have a lot of stuff, I got a lot of stuff. Here's the land before us. You take the left and I'll take the right. You take the right and I'll take the left. Did I get that backwards? He gives the choice to Lot. Of course, it's already been decreed by God in chapter 12 that God is going to give the land to Canaan, of Canaan to Abraham. Abraham offers the choice to Lot. So everybody holds their breath except for God. Lot looks to the valley of the Jordan, to the east of the Jordan. He finds it dazzling. He chooses east. I don't know whether that's left or right. He chooses east, which removes that threat to the covenant. And so now Abraham, the word is used, settles for the first time, settles in Canaan. He was a sojourner before. He comes back from Egypt. There it is. He just flat marches out of Canaan into Egypt. You don't do that sort of thing if you settled in Canaan. So he just flat, because he's a sojourner. He's a nomadic. It's a nomadic patriarchal kind of thing. But now when he comes back, after Lot is out of the way, he settles in Canaan. And you can see it there where, okay, this is going to be his land. It's a kind of a statement from the human perspective that this is going to be Abraham's land, or his descent, the land for his descendants.
God did tell him, any place your feet touches.
Yeah, we're going to look at that.
That will be your land, so.
So that's the next, he means that literally. It's important local color. It's an overdone local color that's divinely inspired overstatement. Every place that your feet touches. So you get this little reminder before he gets to that part, the reaffirmation of the promise in the previous chapter. Now this is after Lot is gone. We're going to look at Sodom in a minute. The men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. And so that's foreshadowing, anticipation of what's coming up, that something's going to happen. And then he gets on to, he's going to get on to the promise, and then we're going to move into 14 in a second. But here's a modern take on it's one of the mysteries. Where were Sodom and Gomorrah? And this is the Dead Sea. I did not pick a good map for this, now that I think about it. We'll show you where that is. So here's Israel. Here's Canaan right here. And here's the Dead Sea. Here's the Jordan. And here's what is called in the times of Jesus, the Sea of Galilee right here. And so he picks east of the Jordan, the valley of the Jordan. And so there's been this archaeological digs to try to establish where were Sodom and Gomorrah. And it turns out to not have been as difficult as you might think because of an extraordinary find, which is, we'll talk about when we talk about the destruction of Sodom, the find of what are called sulfur balls. Little clumps of sulfur all over the place. Some of them burned. You can see burn layers in the land that go this way, that they scorch this way. It's extraordinary. It really is. But so that's a modern take on where Sodom and Gomorrah were. I don't have any reason to particularly question it. We have this reference in chapter 13 of Zoar. Lot looked and he saw this land as you go to Zoar and then on to Egypt. And so, you know, this was the area that he really found enticing. Abraham is up here somewhere in or near Bethel, which is a fixture in Israelite history. Comes back to Bethel a lot. And he mentions Hebron, which is interesting right here in chapter 13. Is it 13? Or am I way ahead of myself here? No, right here, yeah. So let's go ahead and read 14 through 18 and finish this off now that Abraham is settled. And the Lord, so after he settled, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. Very labored. If you remember in chapter 12, there's a very, very brief statement. To your descendants, I will give this land. Right there. Afterward, after he gets back from Egypt, builds another altar. Did he build an altar or he sacrificed again? After Lot is gone, and after he settles in Canaan finally, he gets this much, much more robust statement about the promise. This is the only part of the promise, the covenant promise. This is going to be the covenant. All that stuff about in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed and so on and so forth. That's not a part of the covenant. The covenant in 15 is about land. And from the Israelite standpoint, it's about land. This statement in 12, this is a great example of God. You know, you've heard me chastise the idea of, that's strong. Question the prudence of imagining that thinking that God is looking over the shoulder of the person he's talking to and really talking to you 2,000 years down the road, like the person he's actually like when Jesus is talking to someone in the story, pick somebody, he's really not, you know, we want to say, what is he saying to us? Well, that's fine, but you have to go through what he was saying to the person that he's talking to at the time. And what he's saying to you needs to be somehow an extension of that. You know what I mean? That's my point. Here's an example of where you go, wow, all this stuff here, after like in 3, I'm not sure Abraham, what would he have thought was important in this statement? Well, it would be, I mean, man, right here, this part right here is the part that Abraham would hear, and that's the part that gets reaffirmed. The means by which he's going to create a great nation out of him, he's going to give him the land of Canaan, and unbeknownst to him at this point, way down the road, just about 1,000 years later, God would establish a kingdom under one of his descendants, and that descendant's name was David, was going to be David. But that was 1,000 years down the road. I will make of you a great nation, did not get fulfilled until David and Solomon. That's when they became a great nation.
Abram was probably going, when he said, I'll make your descendants this great nation, probably thinking, I don't even have a son, my wife can't have kids. So how am I going to have descendants that,
Aren't you practically quoting Abraham? Yeah, that's what he's thinking what you and I would be thinking. Well, this is all well and good. Hey, dear Lord, I'm hearing a lot of words, but all I got is me and my barren wife over here. And, you know, we're coming up on however old we are. And, you know, it's just really not looking good. But the God who is never in a hurry, details. He who created the heavens and the earth, Yeah, I know he created the heavens and the earth and the seas and all that is in them. I don't think he can get me a child.
So Abraham was probably been about 75. And Sarai was probably about 65. Because it was another 25 years before they had a son, so.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, in 13, I mean, there's no time hacks on this sort of thing, right? Where is this in the timeline? We don't have any, you know. But I take your point. It's just, yeah, that's what's going on. So this very strong reaffirmation of what wasn't even included in the promise, became a kind of almost an afterthought. Before he left for Canaan, when he was not there yet, I will make of you a great nation. He gets there, and there's this great statement of promise, 1 through 3. He gets there. After he's there, there's a single statement in the narrative: to your descendants I will give this land. And that's it. And it seems to me it did make a great impression, because the next story is him heading out to Egypt. And then the Pharaoh chases him back to the promised land. He gets there, he settles. After he settles, he gets this. Finally, this is the promise for the land. And it's all the Israelites in future generations would care about. But not enough to give up all their idols and, and follow the one true, follow the Creator. Let's see, arise, walk about, blah, blah, blah. Then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron. And there he built another altar. Hebron will become, this is another example of what we would call a divinely inspired anachronism. So at the time of writing, there is no Hebron. Hebron will be the capital city of the southern tribe of Judah. When David takes control of Judah in the first few chapters of 2 Samuel, he will be anointed king over Judah in Hebron, tribal Judah. He makes that deal with Abner, Saul's commander-in-chief, former commander-in-chief. And through that deal, he's going to win the allegiance of the rest of the tribal elders, supposedly, and then become king over all Israel. Fascinating narrative. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, he then takes these disparate tribes that squabble over everything. Remember, Benjamin was almost completely destroyed by the rest of the tribes in the period of the Judges. He will take these tribes and fuse them into a nation. That's how the 12 tribes, that's what they're called, the 12 tribes become the nation or kingdom of Israel. That happened who understood all this tribal stuff, and that something had to change. But anyway, it's interesting that we get this reference to Hebron, which will become, he uses the term that later Israelites would use for it, which would become the capital of the southern tribe of Judah. Okay, at 9:57, we'll get on to chapter 14. And I have to read some names. I don't want to read all these names, because I'm going to slaughter everyone. This might be the worst. Some of them in English don't come across all that well. But subject change. We got to pick up a story about Lot again. Lot hasn't been rejected by God, dispensed with, and so forth. And it's not as if Abram doesn't know from family allegiances. That's all there still. And so this is the event that happens. It came about in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar. We're not even going to bother looking where these places are, because I don't know that it matters for our purposes. We want to get to the second half of this chapter. Arioch, king of Elasar. This is the one that doesn't come into English very well. Chader Laomer, king of Elam.
Why don't you just say there was 5 kings?
There's 5 kings.
And,
The five kings of Shinar, there's 4 actually.
4 and 1 and 5 and others.
Yeah. Elasar, Elam, Goyim, I missed one already. Shinar, Elasar, Elam, and Goyim. There's 4 kings. They made war against 5 kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboam, and Bela. And then he tells you that the last one is Zoar. All these came as allies to the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea, so that's the Dead Sea. 12 years they had served that guy, but the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, he, the leader of the 4 kings, and the kings that were with him came and defeated somebody, some group in some place. I'll go ahead. Glenn, what are my obligations here to read these words? I need Alexander Skirby. I need Alexander Skirby to do this. I should have had him do it. Rephaim and Ashtaroth. There's a god right there. Karnaim and Ham, and anyway, and they defeated these people at Mount Seir by the wilderness. A lot of local color. Some people will get angry, but the person that gets angry, you come up and read it. If you get angry, if you don't like this, you don't like what I'm doing right now, you got to come up and read this. That's my rule. Then they turned back and came to Kadesh, we'll call it Kadesh. Conquered all the country of the Amalekites. There's another anachronism, because the Amalekites would not yet be a people, but they would have become the Amalekites by the time this was written. And the Amorites, who are on the list of 7 evil nations that the Israelites are going to displace, who lived in Hazazon Tamar, king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboam and Bela came out, and they arrayed for battle against them in the valley of Siddim, against the leader of the other kings. 4 kings against 5, so there's the war. Boy, he spends a lot of time setting up the chessboard, doesn't he? Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, so obviously they're losing. The 5 are losing to the 4. And they fell into them, but those who survived fled to the hill country. I don't know that we care at this point for our purposes. They took all the goods of Sodom. There's the part that matters. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed. And they took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions and departed, for he was living in Sodom. So now you know why it matters. There's all these things working together, right? The men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked. It was one of the ironies. He's already identified the men of Sodom as wicked. Now we find Lot living among them. And then we're going to find Abraham going to war to defeat, on behalf of Sodom, to defeat the kings that took Sodom, which will lead to this interesting interchange between the king of Sodom and Abraham in a minute. But at any rate, they're captive, and this is family stuff here, right? And what do we know about those who bless Abraham and those who curse Abraham? The former get blessed and the latter get cursed. Would this constitute more of a blessing on Abraham or a curse on Abraham? How do you think Abraham's going to read this? Right? I will curse those who curse you. Here it is again. Exactly like with the Pharaoh in Egypt. He said, hey, wait a minute, something's wrong here. I've got the wrath of a god or something going on. And it's because he took Sarah, Abraham's wife, who he claimed was a sister, which is not a lie, but half a lie is the part of the lie that's the half lie that's the lie part is the lie. So, you know, I only halfway lied. Half of that was true. Yeah, but the other half was a lie. Okay. Anyway, he's been cursed. He's now put himself directly in the line of fire of Abraham's God on the other side of the Jordan. And then here it comes. You can see it. A fugitive came and told Abram, whom he calls a Hebrew, which is an anachronism, because the Hebrews were the descendants of Jacob in Egypt at the time of Moses. So you have this reference by Moses, the writer, of Abraham as a Hebrew. And there's this identification thing going on. There can be any number of reasons why he would do that, but it's very interesting that for the first and only time, he refers to Abraham as the Hebrew. He was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. So you have this cursed people, the Amorites, were a cursed people who are allies. It's complicated. They're allies of Abraham. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he led out his trained men born in his house, 318, and then went in pursuit as far as Dan, another anachronism. There is no Dan. Dan is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Dan will get an allotment in Israel hundreds of years later, which they will abandon because they can't kick out the Canaanites, and they will move north on the northern border of Israel and exterminate a city so they can take the city over. Go figure. But at any rate, he referenced to Dan because they would have understood Dan. He divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. That's a long ways up, isn't it? Damascus is, can we get Damascus on this? Damascus is way up here, way up north of any place. Actually, no, not on here. It's in, I don't remember where it is in relation to Haran, but this is Syria, I think. Is that right? So Damascus is up here. So he chases them back from whence they came. He brought back all the goods, and he also brought back his relative Lot with his possessions, and also the women and the people. So there's 16 verses. He really labors the story, leading to this extraordinary, let's see, where's, wait a minute. I'm just confused myself. Where's the story of the encounter between Sodom, the king of Sodom, and that's Melchizedek. Oh, there it is. I think that's afterwards. Okay, let's go ahead and do Melchizedek. I'm not sure. This is another question you always want to ask. Why is this story? Why this here? What purpose does this story serve in his larger narrative? And it could be another example of its importance lies precisely in the fact to set the stage for him being the archetype. He's the type of Christ. That's his use in the Bible. That's his use in the Bible. In this story, he appears for a couple of verses and then he disappears. But that little seed becomes the basis for a whole doctrinal section of the high priesthood of Christ in the book of Hebrews. This right here forms the basis for the very doctrine of the high priesthood of Christ in the book of, and then that's the only place where it is, the high priesthood of Christ. Then after his return from the defeat of the leader of the kings, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shabba, that is the king's valley, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. So he mentions, think of the order here. The king of Sodom went out to meet him. That gets interrupted because in comes the king of Salem. And then after the encounter with the king of Salem, then he picks up the story of his encounter with Sodom. So he interrupts. He says, the king of Sodom came out to meet him. The king of Melchizedek, then he overrides it. The king of Melchizedek, Melchizedek came out to meet him. And then he explains that, and then he gets back to Sodom. So why does he interrupt? Why not just tell the whole story of Sodom? that it's just a fascinating literary arrangement here. I don't have a very good answer, except look at the outcomes of these two things. Melchizedek, king of Salem. So these two kings come out, and they're going to have two fundamentally different takes, different encounters, what's the word? Postures towards Abram. So maybe to understand how, I don't know what the word is, compromised Sodom's take on Abram is, and his approach to Abram, he tells the story of Melchizedek first, so you can then see Sodom's interaction with him in that light. Melchizedek, king of Salem, we'll get back to Salem in a bit, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. I think that's the first use of God Most High, right? Now's a good time to look at the notes, right? I didn't write it. God Most High, or Most High God, appears only here in the Psalms 4 times and in Daniel 4 times. That's God Most High. But look what happens. He's going to use God Most High. The king of Salem, prompting Abraham to use the phrase God Most High when he talks to Sodom. So there's been this, through Melchizedek, there's been this elevation in the narrative's understanding of who this God, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, is. He is now God Most High. And the vehicle by which it happens is this foreign king who never was in the narrative before and who will now disappear, never to be seen again. He gets 2 verses. And his importance in the history of redemption is out of all proportion to the amount of text he gets, because this is all he gets. Anyway, we'll talk about this ambiguity here later, but Melchizedek, blesses him, Abraham, and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High." So he elevates Abram by elevating the status of God himself. He is God Most High, and Abraham is of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, virtually saying creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand and asked for nothing. And then Abraham, gave him, Melchizedek, 1/10 of all. And what all is there is spoils he took? I don't know. And then that's the end of the story. And you can go read Hebrews as to its significance in the history of redemption. That is the subject matter of the end of chapter 5 through chapter 7. Yeah. And maybe we can look at it next week and do a little bit of an excursus. Jesus will be a priest after the order of Melchizedek, not Aaron. You have the Mosaic tradition with Aaron's priesthood, and you now have the tradition of the messianic rule of Jesus after the order of Melchizedek. He then becomes prophet, priest, and king. All 3.
Well, some of it too is the fact that Melchizedek was a king, and Christ is going to be a king. He's also going to be a priest. So Aaron wasn't a king. He was only a priest. Right.
So here you have, he's a type also in this sense. Melchizedek appears to be both a king and a priest, but out of nowhere, this priest of God Most High, the God of Abraham, appears out of nowhere. Where did he come from? How did he come to gain that position? But one of the other important factors here is where he's from. Salem, which might even probably be a reference to Jerusalem, which is not important for another 1,000 years or something like that. They will not take Jerusalem. They will still be fighting the Jebusites. During the period of the Judges, Jerusalem is referred to as Jebus, because that was the city that the Jebusites controlled. And they will not take, when the angel of death comes to wreak havoc on the nation because of David's sin, David will have to go buy a place to build an altar from a Jebusite. That place will eventually become, I think, the location of the temple. But he bought it from a Jebusite, and we're talking about the middle of David's reign. So the establishment of Jerusalem as the city of David and the city of Israel, the city of Israel, was a long, long ways in the future. He now appears out of nowhere 1,000 years earlier and has this encounter with Abraham. It's extraordinary. There's this God over it all, God Most High, with the pieces moving, the chess pieces moving here and there. And I think he brings in these people to serve their purpose, and then they disappear again, or something like that. I don't know. But the divine plan here is way beyond Abraham, and it's way beyond Lot. It's way beyond Moses, the writer, any of the participants. There's a story going on. There's a human story, unfolding drama, but there's the meta narrative. There's the divine narrative being woven together through the events on the ground that he is in control of, headed directly for Jacob and then the 12 tribes. So we'll go ahead and stop there and finish up 14 next week. Clean up some mess here. Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
In Psalm 110, verse 4, the Lord has sworn, the one change his mind, you are a priest to heaven, after the order of my head.
Out of nowhere, 110.
Yeah, just kind of thrown in the middle there.
Lord said to my Lord, famous messianic enthronement psalm. The Lord said to my Lord, quoted in the New Testament, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Kingship. Then, surprisingly, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest, but not of Aaron. The only priest they had was priests of Aaron. He dispenses with Aaron. He deprecates Aaron in favor of Melchizedek. This king is not going to be according to the order of Aaron. He's going to be according to the order of Melchizedek. And this forms the basis for almost the entire argument for the incomparable greatness. Not just that Jesus is better, that Christ is better, but that the incomparably great Christ, who is after Melchizedek, both king and priest. So we might talk about that again a little bit next week, some of the theology behind that. And that's it. We'll stop right there. 10:17. We still almost got done. That's only because I gave short shrift to the first half of that. Okay, let's go ahead and stop. Thanks for joining everybody on the Zoom feed. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Gabe, Stacy, Nate, adios.